We welcome on good friend of the drive, host of the Jake Asman Show on YouTube, as well as a host on ESPN Radio and Mad Dog Radio. That is Jake Asman. Jake, good afternoon. How are you?
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. We know you're busy and going from place to place right now. So we always appreciate the time and the insights. But I got to ask, based on expectation, did you expect the sheer flurry of moves that we saw over these first 24 hours of this free agency period here?
You know, when you looked at just how many notable running backs there were, I think it feels like maybe more than we've had in the past because the players we're talking about are so recognizable at those positions with kind of just the age of gambling and fantasy football.
Yeah.
I think maybe that's why it feels like there's so many more moves. But the first, 24 hours of free agency, there's always a bunch of transactions, but it's a lot of guys that probably the casual fan is not necessarily that plugged in on. And what was unique about this year, besides the running backs, you also had several notable veteran quarterbacks change teams. So you combine all that, and it really has been wild, and it's been entertaining to follow. But I'm curious, as we sit here and have this conversation, when's the run on the remaining receivers going to pick up? When's the run on some of these top offensive tackles really going to heat up here? And there's always trades, too, that could happen. So it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. But we had so many notable moves happen early, I think, because of the amount of quarterbacks and running backs that were available this time around.
Yeah, Jake, so I think I spent about 9 or 10 hours on Twitter yesterday. So just scrolling through that and seeing Jets fans throughout the day. What did you make of the Jet fan reaction just throughout the day when there were no signings, and how were you feeling in that moment?
Man, I won't lie. I mean, it was frustrating just because this past season was so frustrating for every Jet fan for obvious reasons. You wanted to see them come out and sign a big-time tackle or get a big-time receiver or lock up that backup quarterback. And, for really the first 10 and a half hours of free agency, they weren't doing anything. And, I understand why Jet fans were frustrated, but eventually they did come through with the Tyrod Taylor signing, probably getting the best backup quarterback you could have gotten once Gardner Minshew and Brissett took opportunities to compete for starting jobs. So you got to just be a little patient, I would say, to all the Jet fans. Of course, if they do nothing else, then you have every right to be upset. But they signed John Simpson, who I think is a under the radar signing to play left guard for them. They used the Laken Tomlinson savings by cutting him and bringing a guy who's younger, just as durable and better.
Yeah.
So I think the Jets have done a decent job so far. It's certainly not done. But, Joe Douglas is a guy who is going to look for bargains, but I do think he might have a splash or two in him. And if it's not in free agency, it could be in the draft, and it certainly could be in the trade market. So, look, the Jets are not a finished product, but at least we know their needs. They needed a backup quarterback. They need to improve the O-line, and they need to add a receiver. Well, they got the best backup. They got one offensive lineman so far. And I think there's still a lot of work to be done, but at least they're on the right path.
Couple of splashes coming up. That's the kind of tease that reminds me to tell everybody to go subscribe to the Jake Asman Show on YouTube and wherever else you can get it, and follow Jake on Twitter for splashes like those. But hitting on the point of the backup quarterback, which I think every time we've talked to you on this show, the backup quarterback position has been a point of contention with this group. But what makes you like Tyrod Taylor for this Jets group? And when you say the best backup quarterback, what makes you say that and kind of qualify him that way?
Well, just looking at his career, right? Tyrod's a guy who's taken a team to the playoffs before. He has always been solid. His deep ball accuracy is still among the best in the NFL. And you just watched him last year with the Giants. He proved he still has, a lot left in the tank. He's a guy that I think can handle playing in New York because he's been here. He doesn't have to move, so I think that's an important factor. If, God forbid something did happen to Aaron Rodgers and the spotlight's on Tyrod Taylor, he's been in that spotlight before. I think he can handle it. And I just think when you look at the available options, right, my preference was either Jacoby Brissett or Gardner Minshew. But once it was clear those guys wanted to go somewhere that will give them a legitimate chance to start, I felt like Tyrod was at the top of the list of possible options. Because you compare him to maybe, say, Ryan Tannehill, I would rather Tyrod Taylor. To me, Ryan Tannehill, even with the connection he has to the Jets coaching staff, he hasn't played great. It feels like his body's starting to break down. And you can say, Tyrod's had his injury issues as well. But half of his major injuries have actually occurred against the Jets. So now, in theory, he can't get hit by the Jets anymore. So that's kind of why I like the move as well.
I like that. Health kind of by osmosis, or whatever that is. I really like that.
One guy we didn't get to talk about yet, Javon Kinlaw, defensive tackle coming over from the 49ers, former first-rounder. I like this signing a lot. It's one that I kind of saw coming. A lot of Jets fans saw coming, the reuniting with Salah. What do you make of Kinlaw and how he's going to fit into this defense and the amount of playing time he's going to get on this defense?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what his role is. I like the signing too because here's a guy that Saleh knows from his time in San Francisco. And when it comes to defensive linemen, I mean, the Jets have a pretty good track record with their coaching staff of developing good players. Obviously, we saw Bryce Huff leaving free agency, and he got paid big money. But, you look at Solomon Thomas, what he's been able to do after being a top pick by the Niners, and he's considered a bust. The Jets bring him in, and he's turned out to be a nice rotational player. Niners fans are going to say, well, he stinks, he's a bust, because that's where he was drafted. And that's kind of like Kinlaw. He was a first-round pick, dealt with some injuries early, but he's coming off a decent season, and you just trust Jeff Ulbrich, you trust Aaron Wycott and their D-line coach to be able to coach him up. So, probably didn't cost them a whole lot. I haven't seen the official details of the contract, but to me it's a low-risk, high-reward signing for a guy who does have talent. He was a first-round pick.
The voice you're hearing, that of Jake Asman, the host of the Jake Asman Show on YouTube. You can hear him on ESPN Radio nationally, hear him on Mad Dog Radio from time to time. Hey, even ESPN Radio New York as well. But you got to follow him on Twitter at Jake Asman for updates on this team. Follow the show on Twitter as well. Now, as we get ready for, actually the free agency period, which kind of clicks towards us tomorrow, what would you say is next on your personal wish list for the Jets? Be it positional, be it a specific player. If you could see Joe Douglas pull the trigger on the next move for the Jets, what would you want to see?
I would love to see them add another high-end offensive lineman, preferably a tackle. Tyron Smith is out there. If they can't get him, maybe sign one of the best remaining guard options. I think as of now, Kevin Zeitler is still there. It'd be funny if they signed him because they signed his other guard mate with the Ravens and John Simpson last night. So I'd look at those two. And then if they're going to dabble in the receiver market, it doesn't sound like they're in on Calvin Ridley, but who after Ridley could go? Could there be a potential signing of a Curtis Samuel or Tyler Boyd? I think their needs are pretty obvious at this point, right? They need to add a lineman or two. They need to add a receiver. And maybe that receiver happens in a trade. There's certainly some guys to watch there. But if I could only pick one move, it'd be sign the best available offensive tackle. And as of right now, I still think that's Tyron Smith, even with his injury concern. If I'm going to spend big in free agency, I'd rather spend big on a guy that I know when he's out there, he's giving me top 5 tackle play.
For other tackles on the board, I'm looking at David Bakhtiari. I'm really picturing the Jets making this signing. Would you be comfortable with him as the week 1 left tackle of this team?
I would not be, just because, he has barely played. They talk about Tyron Smith having injury concerns. Bakhtiari is a guy that I think his last 3 seasons have gone 1 game, 12 games, 1 game. He has just barely played. I'm okay with bringing him in on a 1-year deal if he wants to play with Rodgers, and the base salary is $5 million or less, and there's incentives in there for games played. But we have no idea if he can even pass a physical right now. So I have a tough time imagining that, David Bakhtiari, week 1 tackle, just because he's friends with the quarterback. So I don't love it. I don't mind him on the team, but he can't be their plan and be like, all right, we sub tackle because we have David Bakhtiari now.
That's fair. That's fair.
That's fair enough.
Wouldn't feel awesome about that. I'm right there with you.
How do you see this offensive line, like when we're all done, when free agency is over, when the draft is over? Can you give me some kind of prediction for where this offensive line is going to be? Because Vera Tucker, we don't know if he's playing right guard or right tackle, and Tippmann, we don't know if he's playing center or guard. So where do you think everyone is going to be at the end of the day here?
It's a great question because, to be honest, I really think that's going to be decided in the coming days here based on who they sign. They have options, which I think is a good thing if you're a Jet fan. So much of what they do, if they sign Tyron Smith, for example, he's your left tackle. AVT probably goes back to guard because I'm still figuring the Jets taking another tackle, maybe Talise Falaga, for example, with the 10th overall pick. If they don't sign Tyron Smith, say they sign another guard, well, all of a sudden AVT, I think, is your right tackle, and whoever they take at pick 10 is probably your starting left tackle week 1. So much of what they do, I think, is contingent on the other free agent lineman they signed, because I think they're comfortable playing Vera Tucker at either guard or tackle. I think right now he's slotted to be their right tackle, but that's subject to change based on who they sign over the next coming weeks.
Do you think the Jets are in the T. Higgins requested a trade from the Bengals? I don't really see this one happening for the Jets. I don't really think we have the assets to give up, or I don't know if we're going to be willing to pay someone $20 million plus at the receiver position. But do you think the Jets are going to be at all interested in T. Higgins?
I do think they should inquire. I kind of agree with you, though, right? They don't have a second-round pick this year. They're kind of in a spot where you not only have to acquire T. Higgins, but then you have to give him a huge contract. Are the Jets in position to do that? I think there's other value signings they can make. I feel like the team that adds T. Higgins is a team that truly needs a number 1, and the Jets had that in Garrett Wilson. They need more of a high-end 2. So I don't think the Jets will ultimately get him. I don't even know if Cincinnati will trade him, to be honest, but that being said, they should check in because you never know. Because we have seen receivers surprisingly get traded for what ends up not being all that much. I mean, Amari Cooper a couple of years ago went for a 5th rounder. So you never know. You check in, but I'd be surprised if they end up getting Higgins.
Jake, love being able to do this. But before we let you go, where can we hear you? Where can we see you over the coming days and weeks?
Yeah, so I will be on YouTube each and every day talking about the Jets and everything going on in the NFL. So you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. And then this Thursday night, 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Eastern, of course, or duh. I'm filling in on ESPN Radio nationally. So I'm assuming you guys will be airing that on your station in Albany. So if that's the case, your listeners can hear me late night this upcoming Thursday night from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m.
Beautiful. Wow. Okay, perfect. We'll come right out of ACC tournament coverage right into Jake. That's perfect. Awesome. Wow. As the brand manager, the program director here, that makes my job super easy on Thursday. We love to hear that, and we love Jake Asman, host of the Jake Asman Show. Follow him and the show both on Twitter. Subscribe to the show on YouTube for updates on this Jets team as we move through the offseason. Jake, always appreciate the time. Travel safely, my good man. Always appreciate you joining us here on The Drive.
Hey, likewise, guys. Thanks so much for having me.
The pleasure is ours. That's Jake Asman joining us here on The Drive. We have What's on Tap coming up next here on 104.5 The Team.